Let's talk about agency and agency relationships. Agency is the relationship between a real estate licensee and the party the licensee represents in a transaction. There are a few types of agency relationships that we need to go over. First, you need to know that an agency relationship is created when a party, such as a seller, buyer, landlord, or tenant, hires a licensed real estate broker to represent them. All it takes is for someone to hire a real estate broker and an agency is created. We can create agency expressly, and that's called an express agency. Express agency is created through a formal, written, or verbal agreement. Key word is expressed. The intentions of the parties are expressed somehow in an express agency. A real estate agency relationship requires a real estate agency contract, real estate brokerage agreement, that expresses the intentions of the parties to establish an agency relationship. An express agency contract defines the terms and conditions of the agency relationship, and it authorizes the broker and the broker's agents to act for or to represent the principal in a particular type of real estate transaction. Implied agency is created through the unintentional or inadvertent or accidental actions or behavior of the parties. The parties to an agency relationship are the principal and the agent. The principal is the party who employs the agent to represent him or her. The principal is referred to as the agent's client. The agent owes fiduciary duties to the principal who employs the agent. This may or may not be the party who pays them. The source of compensation is immaterial when it comes to agency. The agent owes a fiduciary duty only to the principal who employs them. And like we said, this may or may not be the party who pays them. The agent fiduciary is the party employed to represent a principal. The broker or brokerage is always the agent or fiduciary. Licensed salespersons working for the brokerage represent the brokerage and are not agents of the client. They represent the brokerage. A salesperson signing a listing is not the seller's agent. The listing creates an agency agreement between the salesperson's brokerage and the seller. All licensees employed by the brokerage owe all clients of the brokerage the same obligations as the brokerage owes all clients. A facilitator or transaction broker is a non-agency relationship. This is when a real estate licensee provides services to parties in a transaction without actually representing any of the parties' interests. The licensee is a non-agent in the transaction and only is there to assist the parties with the mechanics of the transaction. The licensee basically provides services without representation. Facilitators or transaction brokers cannot advocate for anyone because they represent no one. Another type of relationship is the third party or customer relationship. The third party or customer is a non-agency relationship. The third party or customer is a party who is not represented by the agency in a transaction. An example of the third-party relationship would be a listing agent's relationship with a buyer. They're involved in the same transaction, but the agent does not represent the buyer. The listing agent would represent the seller and have a customer relationship with the buyer. Agents owe customers honesty, fair dealing, integrity, and disclosure. You can remember this with the acronym HID, H-I-D. Honesty and fair dealing, integrity in all dealings and negotiation, and disclosure of all known material facts. And when we talk about disclosure, at first substantive contact with a customer, an agent must disclose that a customer should not divulge confidential information. An agent's fiduciary duties would require the agent to share that information with their client. Agents represent the clients and work with customers. They work for the client, but with a customer. When representing, the seller is a client and the buyer is a customer. When representing the buyer is a client and the seller is a customer. When representing the landlord or owner is the client and the tenant is a customer. When representing the tenant is a client and the landlord or owner is a customer. There are a few types of agency that we want to go over. The first type of agency is called special agency. Special agency is created when an agent is authorized to perform one particular act without the ability to legally bind the principal. So special agency is for one act of agency. For example, a broker is a special agent for a seller in a listing agreement. The one act would be promising to find a ready, willing, and able buyer for the seller's property, or promising to do his best to find a ready, willing, and able buyer for the seller's property. A broker is a special agent for a buyer in a buyer representation agreement. And the one act would be the broker promising to do his best to find a suitable property for the buyer. The next type of agency is a general agency. This type of agency is created when an agent is authorized to perform a series of acts or range of acts associated with the continued operation of a particular business, with limited authority to bind the principal. Examples of general agency would be salespersons and broker associates are general agents of a broker. Another example would be property managers. They are general agents of a property owner, and they represent the property owner in a range of activities associated with renting the property. The next type of agency is the universal agency. Universal agency is created when an agent is authorized to perform in place of a principal, empowering the agent to do anything the principal can do personally. Universal agent is this all-encompassing form of agency. It empowers the agent to do anything the principal could do. This type of authority can only be created by a general power of attorney, which makes the agent an attorney in fact. And so the types of agency are the special agency, which is for one act, the general agency, which is for a range of acts, and the universal agency, which is for it empowers the agent to do anything the principal can do on his own. Two other brokerage relationships that you want to be aware of are the single agency relationship and the dual agency relationship. A single agency happens when one broker represents one party in a transaction. A dual agency exists when one broker represents both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. With a dual agency, an inherent conflict of interest exists between the seller's and buyer's respective interests. And it limits the level of fiduciary duties the broker can provide to each of the parties. Dual agency must always be disclosed when a brokerage represents both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. Both parties must give their written consent before the agency is created. Parties must give their consent in writing. A designated agent is a salesperson authorized by the broker to act as the agent of a specific client of the brokerage in a dual agency situation. State laws determine if the dual agency is permitted. Some states allow it, some states don't.